The story begins with an adventurer named Rent journeying through a dungeon. He is stunned when he comes face to face with a formidable, winged monster boasting impressively muscular biceps. The creature reveals a secondary mouth within its first one, sending Rent into a state of utter terror, realizing he might not survive this encounter. The monstrous creature, resembling a giant Digimon, advances towards Rent, who is trembling uncontrollably. Rent is in disbelief, as his dream of becoming a mithril-class adventurer seems to be crumbling before his eyes. His situation worsens when the beast attacks him with both its mouths. After the attack, Rent is shocked to discover he's still alive, but even more astounding is that he's been transformed into a skeleton. Haunted by this horrifying transformation, Rent reminisces about his past when he was flesh and blood, blissfully unaware of his grim future. He used to start his days early, envying the luxurious lives of nobles and scholars who could sleep in. But little did he know, waking up early would soon become the least of his worries. Rent, a low bronze-class adventurer, was raised in a small, obscure town. He relied on the Adventurers Guild for jobs, which were assigned based on rank and skill to prevent unprepared adventurers from meeting untimely ends or turning into skeletons. The guild offered a variety of tasks, from exciting monster hunts to mundane material gathering. Despite being approached by some unambitious adventurers, Rent decides to return to the labyrinth due to the lack of appealing jobs. His peers, preferring leisure activities like playing Fortnite, can't fathom Rent's dedication to his work. Rent prefers to adventure alone, not because of a solitary hero complex, but because he's simply not very skilled. Despite a decade of adventuring, he's still only at the second lowest rank. He scrapes by selling items from cautious jobs and lives a frugal life. His life, while uneventful, involves careful planning in every aspect. However, this caution is thrown to the wind when he stumbles upon a secret passage in a well-explored, deserted dungeon. Rent eagerly explores this newfound area, hoping to find magical treasures. His excitement grows as he realizes that even reporting this discovery to the guild could earn him a fortune. Rent fails to recognize the clear danger signs in a mysterious room. Here, he confronts what he believes is a dragon, the most formidable of all monsters. This dragon appears to have evolved into its ultimate form, emitting a presence so intense it paralyzes Rent, making him realize he stands no chance against this colossal dragonman. Fast forward to the present, Rent is puzzled about how he's still alive after being devoured by the dragon. He's now just a skeleton, an immortal undead creature. Rent knows he's vulnerable to purification magic used by bishops or priests, as undead beings are unnatural in this world. Despite lacking a brain, Rent is deep in thought. He still has his consciousness and memories, suggesting he's alive in some way. He considers returning to town but fears being captured or executed. Confused about his existence, Rent decides to leave the dungeon and avoid his problems. As he leaves, Rent muses over the mysteries of labyrinths, their origins, and the treasures and dangers within. He plans to seek advice from adventurers coming to the dungeon, but realizes he must figure out how to speak without a tongue. Suddenly, a skeleton monster appears, and Rent prepares for battle. Struggling to move due to his skeletal form, he realizes his physical limitations. As a human, skeletons were easy to defeat, but now he struggles to lift his sword. In a moment of vulnerability, Rent discovers he can still use spirit energy, even as an undead. This boosts his physical ability, allowing him to crush his opponent. Surprisingly, defeating the skeleton lets Rent recover the spirit energy he used. The story then flashes back to a time when a woman taught Rent about monsters. She explains that they evolve with time and experience, becoming more formidable. This applies to humans too, who grow through training, but monsters evolve on a whole different level. She uses skeletons as an example of this mysterious evolutionary trait. Skeletons usually remain unchanged, but sometimes they evolve into ghouls through a process called existential evolution. Rent, now a skeleton, sees hope in this. Ghouls look somewhat human because they have flesh. He thinks if he becomes a ghoul, he could disguise himself with robes and masks and return to town without scaring people with his skeletal appearance. Feeling optimistic, Rent sets a new goal: defeat monsters in the labyrinth to evolve into a ghoul. Meanwhile, in town, Rent's friend is disappointed he hasn't returned and decides to make dinner alone. Back in the dungeon, Rent is making progress, having already defeated 5 skeletons. He's regained his mobility and discovered that light from defeated enemies heals him, allowing him to use spirit energy in each battle. Looking for stronger monsters, Rent encounters a slime. They're weak but tricky, as physical attacks don't work well on them. Rent, lacking offensive magic skills and able to only start fires, opts to attack with his sword. He knows slimes can be defeated by piercing their core or breaking them apart until they can't regenerate. Surprisingly, he manages to strike the slime's core, defeating it and taking a magic stone as a reward. He also collects slime ooze to sell later, as it's used in cosmetics. At the guild, two people discuss a newbie looking for a party. They consider recommending her to join Rent, but he's been absent. The newbie, needing money, is advised to explore an easy labyrinth for treasure and material, unaware it's the same labyrinth where Rent. In the labyrinth, Rent reflects on his undead state. He doesn't feel sleep or hunger, which is just as well since he couldn't digest food. He's been fighting non-stop, realizing that evolving into a ghoul will take time. However, his physical abilities and mana use have improved. Surprisingly, he can still use his divinity, a power used to cure injuries and illnesses, purify water, and preserve food despite being undead. Rent uses his divinity to preserve some bread for 3 more days, hoping to regain a normal body that can eat by then. Focused on his goal, he cautiously plans his battles, deciding to flee if he faces more than 4 monsters at once. In this low-level labyrinth, encountering more than 5 monsters would likely spell doom for him. Rent is hard on himself for still being weak despite 10 years as an adventurer and 20 years of training. He possesses spirit energy, mana, and divinity, a rare combination even among the highest-ranked adventurers. Yet, he wishes for just one powerful ability. Most people in his situation would quit adventuring, but Rent persisted, training daily and learning about monsters and magic from a knowledgeable woman. His ultimate goal is to become a mithril-class adventurer, a rank held by those who have saved nations. Despite now being a skeleton, Rent's determination remains unshaken. As he defeats more skeletons, Rent begins to feel stronger than when he was human. After easily taking down another slime, he's sure of his growing strength. Collecting slime goo, he experiences a significant change when light emerges from it. Muscles and hair start forming on his body, followed by skin and eyes. Rent evolves into a ghoul, a significant step forward. Though he's just a dried-out corpse, he's relieved to have flesh again. He thinks he might even evolve into a higher-ranking undead, like a vampire, if he keeps working hard. Now with flesh, Rent tries speaking but can only produce a roar. After some practice, he manages to say hello and good morning, though he sounds more like a zombie. Later, Rent, now with flesh, battles goblins in the dungeon. These goblins are dangerous in groups, but Rent cleverly uses the dungeon's layout to isolate a few for easier combat. Rent, now evolved into a ghoul, has gained muscle and become more agile than when he was just bones. Surprisingly, his mana, spirit energy, and divinity have all increased, making him stronger. He's now able to enhance not just himself but also his sword, which he uses to swiftly defeat a group of goblins. During his exploration, Rent hears a fight nearby and discovers it's a blonde girl from the guild. She's battling a weak skeleton. Rent is excited to see another human after such a long time, but he stops himself from approaching her, aware of his ghastly ghoul appearance. He decides to watch her from afar, realizing he's never seen her before and figuring she must be a new adventurer. Rent reflects on his knowledge of the adventurers in town, knowing them well since they often mock weaker members like him. So, understanding their abilities and allies is beneficial. Rent continues to observe the girl, noting her training but also her lack of strength. She carefully times her attacks but fails to be aware of her surroundings. This leads to her being cornered by a skeleton, but she bravely fights back despite being overpowered. Seeing no other option, Rent intervenes to save her. The girl is shocked and terrified at the sight of the ghastly ghoul. Rent wishes she would help him fight the skeleton, but she's too stunned to be of any use. He quickly dispatches the skeleton and checks on her. When he tries to speak, his zombie-like voice scares her further. To demonstrate he's not a threat, Rent throws away his sword. The girl slowly realizes he's trying to communicate and understands that he's Rent the adventurer. She wonders if his ghoul appearance is some kind of disguise. Rent is at a loss for words to explain his situation to Rena, the girl he just saved. He's technically dead, yet still alive. Rena, realizing he's different from the monsters, thanks him for saving her. Rent reassures her that he's not a threat and asks for her help. She agrees to buy him a rope so he can return to town, and Rent lets her keep the change. Rena introduces herself as the daughter of a knight and promises to help Rent as a way to repay him for saving her. After she leaves, Rent notices her cautious behavior around him. He knows a sensible adventurer would report a mysterious ghoul like him to the guild, but he trusts that Rena, a stranger, won't betray his trust. Back in town, the first thing Rena does is rush to the guild. The guild lady, who was worried about Rena, listens as Rena urgently asks her a question. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Rent battles another slime and confirms he's much stronger than he was as a human. His body moves precisely as he wants, and he easily destroys another slime. Rent starts to think his improved combat skills come from intuition rather than training or study. Ironically, he only gained this power after becoming an undead. To Rent's surprise, Rena returns to the dungeon. He convinces her that he's the same ghoul she met before, explaining that ghouls don't usually appear on the dungeon's early levels. Rena notices that Rent's speech has improved, and he shares that he's been practicing. Rena brings Rent clothes, but she's still scared of his ghoul appearance. She apologizes and hopes she'll get used to it. Rent appreciates her choice of a mage-like robe that covers his entire body. Rena also thoughtfully brings him boots, gloves, and bandages, explaining she had to ask around town for shop locations since she's new. The bandages, she suggests, can cover his arms and legs, showing that she's considered everything he might need. Rent feels moved by Rena's kindness, but as a ghoul, he can't even cry since his body lacks the necessary functions. After putting on the clothes Rena brought, Rent looks quite presentable. The outfit is more comfortable than he expected, though it slightly hinders his visibility. However, he assures Rena that everything is perfect, as he can still fight effectively. Rena makes an awkward move by showing Rent his now ghastly face in a mirror. Realizing his appearance could be problematic, she presents him with a mask. The mask seems to attach itself to his face almost urgently. To their dismay, they find it won't come off. Both are alarmed, and Rena admits that the shop where she bought the mask seemed a bit shady. She chose it for its low price of just 3 copper coins and didn't notice any curses when she touched it. Rent surmises that the mask's curse activates upon being worn. Rena is amazed to see Rent using divinity, and wonders if he can break the curse. Rent tries, but his energy depletes quickly, leaving the curse intact. Rent reassures her that the mask reacted to his divinity, so he plans to save money and seek a powerful cleric to remove the curse. He starts to distance himself, remembering his monstrous form, but Rena stops him. She acknowledges that Rent is not a bad person and says she's no longer scared, despite still trembling. Rent tells her there's no need to rush in getting used to him being a ghoul. Rena promises it won't take long for her to adjust, and they head back to town. During their journey, Rena shares that she left the capital for Malt because there were no suitable jobs for rookies like her there. Rent is amazed that Rena traveled to the countryside, but she explains her desire to see the world and quickly become a skilled adventurer. Rent advises that being cautious, like him, is wise for adventurers since everyone has only one life. Rena agrees, and they share a laugh over a joke about Rent being a rare zombie. Upon reaching Malt, Rent notes that many locals know him, so using his ID might raise suspicions due to his changed appearance. They choose to enter through a different gate. Rent thanks Rena, acknowledging he wouldn't have made it without her help. He expresses concern about putting her in a difficult position, as aiding him might be seen as a crime, risking her adventurer's license. Rena, feeling indebted to Rent for saving her life, is willing to take that risk. At the west entrance, the guards question Rent's unusual look. The situation escalates when they demand to see his face. Rena cleverly explains that Rent's mask is cursed and cannot be removed, and his strange voice is due to an injury inflicted by a monster. She presents his disfigured ear as proof, adding that the mask was meant to cover his scars, but turned out to be cursed. The guards, sympathetic to Rent's misfortune, allow them to enter after failing to remove the mask. Rena dismisses her actions as mere repayment, but soon after, Rent disappears. He watches Rena search for him, reflecting on her potential as an adventurer. He notes her well-maintained but inexpensive equipment, her decent fighting skills, and her bravery. Rent acknowledges that talented individuals like her usually leave him, so he decides to leave her for now, planning to apologize when he looks more human. Rent's true intention for leaving Rena is revealed when he visits a more suitable human collaborator, someone with a secretive past. He enters a house belonging to Lorraine, his chosen collaborator. Attempting to wake her with his distorted voice, he resorts to threatening to drop a book on her. Lorraine recognizes him despite his covered appearance, but is startled when Rent unexpectedly reveals his ghoulish arm. This brings an end to our episode 1 and 2. Subscribe for more anime recaps.